Hi again, it's Jason from Fraser Valley Rose Farm. A few weeks ago I put out a video where I featured what I call the color garden, the first of 8 themed gardens that are part of this project here, a display I'm setting up on our farm where I can show visitors and of course the YouTube audience different ways that you can design gardens. And it can start with the plants. Of course I want to feature the plants, but it also can start with design concepts, and color was the first one I featured, but we're also going to go through things like structure and fragrance, movement, symmetry, all of the different design concepts that you can use in order to build a garden from the ground up, because it can be rather, I'm going to say, overwhelming if you just start with the wide palette of plants there are in the world. Now color, as I say, is not a bad place to start. I've seen people do things very effectively with starting with a themed white garden or something with silver foliage or pastel colors, or you can go like me and just go unrestrained with wild bright colors. That's fantastic too. But the theme for today that I'm going to talk about is about texture, and by texture what I mean is a mixture of things like bold foliage or slender foliage, different sizes and shapes of flowers. And so without further ado, let's have a quick look at the plants that I chose and how they fit into the texture garden. First in at the front here, let's have a look at this tiny little Sanguisorba, miniaturized little flowers. I love the tiny, finely variegated leaves. I mean, this is just the personification of fine texture. I will put in the cultivar names and the botanical names as I can in editing here, because I'm not going to remember those specifically as I show you the plantings. But look at this one in comparison to the bold leaves of this Angelica here, which will be even bolder in coming years. You can see it's sending some big leaves from the base, but these were kept in a pot, so the leaves are a little bit smaller than they should be. Have a look at the texture of these rounded buds of flowers. I mean, they just open up from those big round buds into these umbelliferous rounded heads. Just gorgeous, and they are always covered in bees and other pollinators. So they are a wonderful addition to this garden, and again, bold texture. At the back here, well, I've put in a rose. This is Florentina. Just keep in mind, it is a rose garden, so having that climb up the backdrop of the garden will add to the appeal of the garden, even if it doesn't have anything particular in texture other than just a really nicely formed flower. And likewise, down in the center here, I do have a very finely textured rose called White Koster. It's a Polyantha, I think. Now, stepping back from the garden, and I am going for contrast of textures, have a look at this festuca right at the front here. That's just a blue festuca grass that just seems to, I guess, have the longer grass-shaped leaves and just add a completely different texture than the rounded leaves we've been looking at. Here's another one with that grassy type leaf, but it's a Nifophia, so it will have these bottle brush type flowers at the top that will also add to the different form and textures of the foliage and flowers in the garden. Back in the center here, I know I skipped one, Geranium that isn't too interesting right now. When I had it in the shade, it had some beautiful markings on the leaves, and then when I put it in the sun, it bleached out a little bit. I think that's probably just a transplant shock thing, but I do like that shape of leaf for contrast, a very rounded, scalloped shape, and then hopefully it will regain those markings as we go along here. Now, this one here, probably most of you will recognize smoke bush. And this one here is a dwarf smoke bush called Young Lady, and you can see, of course, that the smoke or the flowers on this is starting to fade. We've had some warm weather, so it's not at its best right now, but you plant for promise, really. And when I put it in, it was gorgeous and smoky looking, and I expect it will be that in coming years. Now, here's a star of the show. This is, I mean, for texture, what could you ask for? This is a tiger eye sumac, and look at the old leaves being sort of a deeper green, but still a very fresh green, but the newer foliage being bright yellow, and then how divided they are, and just that really lacy texture in the garden. I mean, that's gorgeous. And the overall shape of the plant, I have it in the front yard where it sort of has a Dr. Seussy kind of look to it, where it goes all over the place and really looks wild and contorted, which I like a lot. So I couldn't have found a nicer plant for having texture featured. A couple more plants I want to show off here. This is a planting down here of Thalictrum, that's meadow rue, and not only does it have this fine sort of ferny aquilegia type foliage, but then later on in season, and these are young plants, it will have beautiful airy flowers above it. And I have those actually in bloom elsewhere in the garden, so I'll probably capture a shot of those. But again, for the texture garden, what a find. And finally, and these gardens are only about 10 feet wide, so I can't pack in too much stuff. This is a fancy-leaved Persicaria. Now I know some people are going to go, Persicaria? Why would you put that in your garden? But look at it. It's amazing. What a nice shape, what a nice set of colors on the foliage. And this one has not been poorly behaved in my garden so far, and I'm willing to put in the efforts to try to control it and keep it tamed if it does start to ramble a little bit. So that's the entirety of the texture garden, or at least the bones. And as I said, in the color garden, it may take a little while to regulate how these grow into each other and to figure out the final spacing on them. But I'm pretty happy with the spacing of the bones. I'm certainly happy with that tiger eye sumac in the back. The smoke bush I'm quite happy to have there. So I think it's anchored by some strong plants, and then I'll just fill it in as we go forward. Well, I hope you enjoyed this feature of the plants in the texture garden. I'm actually hoping to get all of the rest of the major planting done for the remaining 6 themed gardens before I run out of good planting weather, which should be in the next few weeks. So you'll see some updates on this project in the meantime. I hope you'll join me for that. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions about this or any other design or gardening concepts, just drop those down below the video in the comments. I'll see what I can do to help.